Chapter 2 of The Blue Envelope. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading today by Dawn Larson in Minnesota. The Blue Envelope by Roy J. Snell. Chapter 2. A Bold Stroke Rewarded. Bacon grease was spilled and toast burned in the preparation of breakfast, which was devoured in gulps. Then, with some misgivings, but much determination, the two girls hurried away up the beach in the direction from whence had come the pop-popping of their stolen motorboat. Coming at last to the place where the sandy shore was replaced by ragged boulders, they began making their way through the tangled mass of underbrush, fallen tree trunks and ferns, across the point of land which cut them off from the next sandy beach. "This would be splendid if it wasn't so serious," said Marian as they reached the crest of the ridge and prepared to descend. "I always did like rummaging about in an unexplored wilderness. Look at that fallen yellow pine, 8 feet through if it is an inch, and the ferns are almost tall enough to hide it. And look at those tamaracks down in that gully. They look like black knights. Wouldn't they make a picture?" "Not just now. Come on," exclaimed Lucile, who was weary of battling with the jungle. "Let's get down to the beach and see what's there. There's a long stretch of beach, I think, maybe half a mile. But we must be careful how we make our way down. We might discover something, and we might be discovered first." To descend a rock-ribbed hill, overgrown with tangled underbrush and buried in decaying tree trunks, is hardly easier than to ascend it. Both girls were thoroughly out of breath as they finally parted the branches of a fir tree and peered through to where the beach, a yellow ribbon of sand, circled away to the north. "Not there," whispered Marian. Lucile gripped her cousin's arm. "What's that thing 2/3 of the way down, at the water's edge?" "Don't know. Rock, maybe. Anyway, it's not our motorboat." "No, it's not. It's worth looking into, though. Let's go." Eagerly they hurried along the hard-packed sand. The tide was ebbing. The beach was like a floor. Their steps quickened as they approached the object. At last, less than half conscious of what they were doing, they broke into a run. The thing they had seen was a boat, and a boat to persons in their position was a thing to be prized. Arriving at its side, they looked it over for a moment in silence. "It's pretty poor and very heavy, but it will float, I think," was Marian's first comment. "It's theirs. Thought it wasn't worth risking a stop for. But how did they get into our camp? We haven't seen their tracks through the brush." "Probably took up one small stream and down another." The boat they had found was a wide, heavy, flat-bottomed affair, such a craft as is used by fishermen in tending pond nets. For a time the two girls stood there undecided. The chances of their recovering the motorboat seemed very poor indeed. To go forward in this heavy boat meant hours of hand-blistering rowing to bring them back to camp. Yet the thought of returning to tell Lucile's brother that they had lost his motorboat was disheartening. To go on seemed dangerous. True, they had rifles, but they were, after all, but two girls against three rough men. In spite of all this, they decided in the end to go on. Pushing the boat into the sea, they rowed out a few fathoms, then set the sail and bore away before the brisk breeze. The fact that the oarlocks, which were mere wooden pegs, were worn smooth and shiny, told that the boat had not been long unused. In a short time they found themselves well out from the shore in a gently rippling sea, while the point behind which lay their camp grew smaller and smaller in the distance. Presently they cleared a wooded point of land and came in view of a short line of beach. Deep set in a narrow bay, it might have escaped the eye of a less observant person than Marian. So, too, might the white speck that shone from the brown surface of that beach. "What's that in the center?" she mumbled, reaching for the binoculars by her side. "It's our schooner!" she exclaimed after a moment's survey. "Yes, sir, it is. Anyway, it's a motor boat, and if not ours, whose then? We'd better pull in behind the point, drag our boat up on the rocks, and come round by land," whispered Lucile. "Yes, if we dare," said Marian, overcome for a moment with fear. "If they have seen us and come out to meet us, what then?" "I hardly think they'd see us without a field glass," said Lucile. Bending to the oars, they set their boat cutting across the wavelets that increased in size with the rising wind. 10 minutes of hard pulling brought their boat in behind the point where it was quieter water and better rowing. This took them to a position quite out of sight of the white spot on the distant beach. If the pirate robbers were truly located in the bay and had not seen the girls, they were safe to steal up close. "Well, suppose they have. If the worst comes to the worst, we can escape into the brush," said Marian. "We won't be worse off then than we are now. If only we can catch them off guard and get away with our motor boat," said Lucile fervently. 2 hours of fighting the wilderness brought them at last to the beginning of the short, sandy beach. By peering through the branches they discovered that a clump of young tamaracks, growing close down to the shore, still hid the white spot they had taken for their boat. Lucile stepped out upon the sand and then bent down to examine a footprint. Quickly she dodged back into the brush. "They're here, all right," she whispered. "That's the track of the fellow with the mismatched feet." "Listen," said Marian. "Sounds like shouting," said Lucile, after a moment's silence. "What do you suppose?" "We'd better move around to a better position." Cautiously they worked their way through the dense undergrowth. Pausing now and again to listen, they laid their course by the sounds. These sounds resolved themselves into bursts of song and boisterous laughter. "They're drinking," said Lucile with a shudder. "If they are, we daren't get near them," whispered Marian. Closer and closer they crept until at last they expected at any moment to come into view of the camp. "It's no use," said Lucile at last, shrinking back into the brush. "I can't go on. They're drunk, and all drunken men are dangerous. It is no use risking too much for a motorboat." Wearily then they made their way back through the brush. So sore were their muscles by this time that every step gave them pain. Missing their way, they came out upon the beach 100 yards from their boat. There, behind the sheltering boughs of a dwarf fir tree, they threw themselves upon the bed of pine needles to rest. "Look!" exclaimed Lucile suddenly. "What's that out there?" "Our motorboat!" Marian gasped. "It's broken loose and is going out with the tide. They must not have seen it. Quick, our rowboat! We may beat them yet." With wildly beating hearts they raced up the beach. Having reached the heavy rowboat, they pushed it off. Wading knee deep in the sea to give the boat a good start, they at last leaped into their seats and grasped the oars, and with strong, deft strokes set her cutting the water. Length by length they lessened the distance between them and the drifting prize. Now they were 200 yards away, now 100, now 50, now There came a shout from the shore. With a quick glance over her shoulder, Lucile took in the situation. "We'll make it," she breathed. "Pull hard. They're a long way off." Moments seemed hours as they strained at the oars, but at last they bumped the side of the motorboat and the next second found themselves on board. Marian clutched to the tiller of the rowboat while she swung round to the wheel. Lucile gave the motorboat a turn, and to their great joy the noble little engine responded with a pop, pop, pop. There came another shout, a hopeless one, from the robbers. "We'll beat them! We Marian broke off short. "Look, Lucile! Look over there!" To the right of them, bobbing up and down as they had seen it once before, was the head of the strange brown boy. "Do you suppose they did kidnap him?" said Lucile. "We can go by where he is," said Marian. "They can't catch us now." The boat swung around and soon they were beside the swimmer. "Look!" cried Lucile. "His feet are tied tightly together. He mustn't have been their friend. They cared